Order, order. Welcome to the Treasury Select Committee on Wednesday, the 18th of March, 2026. Today we are talking to the Financial Ombudsman Service about their work, and I'm delighted to welcome Liam Coleman, who's the Interim Chair at the Financial Ombudsman Service. He's joined by Jenny Simmons, who's the Interim Chief Executive at the Financial Ombudsman Service, and Dame James Dipple-Johnston, who's the Interim Chief Ombudsman at the FOS. Often we might refer it to as the FOS, which is the abbreviation, of course. A lot of interims in place, and since we scheduled this hearing, we found out on Monday from the government, not us specifically, it was announced to the public in general, that there is a consultation about the future of the Financial Ombudsman Service. So if I could start with you, Mr. Coleman, and when did you first become aware of this plan by the Treasury to take over the appointment of the chair?
So I think towards the end of last year, I was made aware that they were considering that.
Okay, so that was they were talking to you about considering it. Did they say that they were then planning to consult, or did they give you any idea of the time frame for that?
Not directly at that stage. I've had one direct interaction with the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, a month or two ago, when that was confirmed that that was likely to be the direction of travel they were going to take.
So, and how did they contact you at the end of last year? Was it by letter or an official?
Via James, via colleagues that were in constant discussion with them about the total reform package.
Okay, so Mr. Dipple-Johnston, so we're having a regular meeting and they just dropped it into the conversation?
Yes, as we've been developing the package of reforms, they've raised this as part of what they want to consider.
Okay, so they raised it, it wasn't suggested from the FOS?
That's correct.
Okay, then when you had the interaction, Mr. Coleman, with the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, was that a scheduled meeting, or was it specifically about this issue?
No, it was a meeting. It was an introductory meeting for me to meet them. It's the first time I met them in this role.
So an introductory meeting at which she then will talk to you about the Treasury takeover of the appointment of your successor.
To talk about the whole package of reforms that they were considering.
So it was mainly about the reforms. So your first meeting with them was about the changes.
In total,
okay.
Yes.
So at that point, had you had any chance to put any thoughts in about the changes, or was it, because given that Mr. Dipple-Johnston was aware of this at the end of last year, had there been toing and froing between the FOS and the government at that before?
Not so much between the FOS. Obviously, the chair appointment up until this point has been the responsibility of the FCA. Mm-hmm. So I believe there were discussions between the FCA and Treasury about that aspect. It wasn't one that was principally involving ourselves, no.
Okay, and you hadn't had any other conversations with the FCA about these changes?
We've had conversations about what that might mean in terms of the process, because at the moment, as you will be aware, I'm sure, from previous witnesses here, the FCA has an oversight function with the FOS, which discusses a whole range of issues. The chair of the FCA and the board of the FCA obviously have appointment rights over the chair of the FOS. So as they became aware as well, there was general discussions about that, but not one raised by us in terms of could it or couldn't it happen.
Okay, well, hopefully we are seeing the FCA next week, so we have a chance to discuss some things there. But now that the Treasury is going to be appointing your successor, Mr. Coleman, I mean, as I say, well, actually, just to be clear, you're interim.
Yes.
Is that something that you have any indication that you could be made permanent, or would you be having to apply with obviously this new rules?
My understanding is I would have to apply.
Yeah, okay, just to be absolutely clear, right. So now the Treasury is going to appoint your successor, or the permanent chair, which theoretically could be if you chose to apply. What safeguards do you think, or your colleagues think, should be written into any new legislation to prevent political pressure being placed on the Financial Ombudsman Service to make government-aligned decisions?
I think in terms of the consultations that we've been undertaking, I would say, and I've seen your letter, Chair, this morning on behalf of the committee to the EST, I think there's a line in there, I will probably misquote it, but there's a line in there about the importance of the independence of the FOS. And I would completely agree with that. And I think you use the phrase, it is important to be independent and be seen to be independent, if I quote accurately.
Okay, so
I would completely agree with that. The mechanism for that, about the appointment, I think is a matter for Treasury and Parliament really to decide as the legislative process moves forward as about how that is best resolved. But I think the independence of the organisation moving forward is important, is really important.
There are, as you saw from our letter, there are examples where this committee and other committees of the House of Commons have an important role in having basically a veto over appointments or dismissals of key roles, particularly most recently the Office for Budget Responsibility has been discussed because of the changes there. Is that something that you have any views on as the interim chair of the FOS?
Not a direct view. I think in terms of we understand that works with other ombudsmen. James talks to colleague ombudsmen across the whole sector in the UK. So we understand that does apply in other places and works well there. So there is no reason that we can see that it couldn't work. But ultimately,
it's a matter for the Treasury.
That would be a matter for the Treasury and Parliament to decide.
Which we understand. Now, we have seen interesting challenges for chairs of other organisations. Obviously, the government came in, remit letters were introduced, were written. We had changes to the payment systems regulator. After they sent a letter in before Christmas, and then they had a phone call the night before actually appearing before this committee that they were going to have changes. We saw the chair of the Competition and Markets Authority removed by the government last year, we believe, for not delivering on measures to boost growth. So how do you think that the Financial Ombudsman Service could be or should be guarded from that sort of political pressure?
I think in your letter it describes a way in which that could be done. As I've referenced, I think in terms of how the service could operate, that is something the service could operate to. I think again that's a conversation between Treasury and Parliament and through the legislative process to see if there are alternate ways in which they would see that being run through. I think Treasury references in their own consultation and discussion in their document that the feedback that they've received, as well as the feedback I think that we've received through the whole consultation process prior to my appointment and after my appointment as an interim chair, has spoken to that key independence point. So I think it's come from all stakeholders. It's come from consumers, consumer groups, businesses. So I think I certainly recognise in this role that it's important. The independence is held at a high level by all of those consumer groups. So demonstrating that moving forward will be, I think, an important feature of wherever that legislation ultimately lands.
There's a bit of an imbalance because most consumers take an individual case to the Financial Ombudsman Service.
Yes.
So they don't have an overall picture of what's happening. The institutions that have the best overall picture are the financial institutions, who are not always biggest fans of the Financial Ombudsman Service because the powers you've got to force them into certain courses of action if you feel that they've not acted properly for a consumer, despite the consumer duty that they already operate under. So do you have any concerns about that any potential loss of independence? I'll just push you a bit further on that because you are a strong body with strong powers as up till now. These proposed potential changes could be seen to shift that balance away from consumers. Do you have any concerns that is the case?
I don't see the changes as speaking to the core purpose of the Ombudsman and its responsibility to look at each case individually on its merits and independently and fairly. No, I don't see that as ultimately challenging that. Clearly, if the Treasury is there appointing the chair, it's appointing one role. We're talking about the whole organisation and how the whole organisation operates. And I think I've seen from my, crikey now, 4 or 5 months in role, that is held, that independence and that dealing with each individual consumer and each individual complaint on the merits of his case is held very tightly and very strongly within the organisation.
You were appointed as interim chair. You will recall, we had, I think, an unhappy session, which I'll come to a bit later, with your predecessor before she left her position. When you were made interim chair, did you have any conversations with ministers about what they expected of you in this role? Did they try and suggest you act in a certain way? Was it basically a political appointment?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay.
I had discussions with the chair of the FTA, and I had what I'd call a process discussion with officials within Treasury. I did not speak directly with anybody in the
So we know that sometimes political pressure doesn't have to be applied directly.
No.
So was there any suggestion when you were having those conversations with officials that they were expecting you to come in as chair of the Financial Ombudsman Service in order to deliver changes that the government had predetermined?
Not particularly, no, not in that regard at all. I was aware that there was an ongoing discussion per the consultation that was going on, so I was fully aware of the fact that changes were being consulted on, the reform package was being discussed. That hadn't been landed at that point in time, so that wasn't a defined package at the point I came in. That was still subject to consultation and input, and I understood that would be in part ourselves and FCA in terms of what we can do immediately, and there was quite possibly and likely to be some form of legislative package that would come along with that reform package. So I was understood all of those were in play, but I wasn't given the direction to do certain things.
So do you see yourself as a champion of the independence of the Financial Ombudsman Service as is, with maybe some changes to be discussed? But which side of the line do you come? Do you feel
No, I think
are you a champion of the Financial Ombudsman Service or the government's person in the Financial Ombudsman Service?
I would say very much the former.
Okay, thank you. And the Treasury has said in its letters, in its announcement of the consultation, that the government, and I quote, "The government intends to take a power that would allow it to specify that particular rules are not to be included in the adapted, fair and reasonable test, or should be dealt with in a different way." What do you understand that actually means? And maybe Ms Simmons might want to add something, or Mr Dibble-Johnson. Mr Dibble-Johnson.
It might be my script.
Yeah. So my understanding of the intent behind that is that there may be some rules that are high-level rules, less precise, less specific, that may not suit a direct application to a case, and that therefore they may be exempted from that high alignment provision in the adapted, fair and reasonable test.
Do you think that that's concerning, that the government's taking power away from yourself as an ombudsman?
Well, I think as long as we still have the fair and reasonable test and the requirement to take into account all of the circumstances of the test, I can't think of...
But it's saying that it could take a power that would allow it to specify that particular rules are not to be included in the fair and reasonable test. So you're on the one hand saying if we have the fair and reasonable test, it's all right, but they're already saying they would look to adapt that.
Sorry, my understanding is it would drop them out of the requirement to uphold, to determine the case in line with the regulatory rules. So if the firm can demonstrate it's complied with the rules in accordance with the intention behind those rules, that we would have to uphold the firm's handling as fair and reasonable. There may be some rules that might not suit that, and therefore they would default back to the complete fair and reasonable test. So we wouldn't be required to operate against that specific rule.
Is that complicated for you to interpret?
I can't think of the circumstances in which the rule might be used. My understanding is this is there as an eventuality. At the moment, a lot of the detail around the test is provided for in the dispute resolution rules, which means that if something isn't working, we have an opportunity through consultation to be able to amend the rules. My understanding of the government's proposals is to put more of that in the primary legislation, and therefore if there's a problem, we would have to change the primary legislation, which can take some time. So my understanding is this is an opportunity to give flexibility, but I can't think of the circumstances at this point in which that would be in.
We'll get onto the legislation in a moment. So are there any things that you would recommend? You've been, you're interim ombudsman at the moment, but you've been working there a while, that you would recommend being taken out that would make it good for consumers, easier for you to do your job better, that are positive changes?
I can't think of anything at the moment that I would take out of us being able to look at the totality of the case and it operating on a fair and reasonable basis.
Okay. I'm sure you're making your views known. Do you think that this would make it difficult for you to do your job?
I think we'll be able to do our job as long as we can continue to have good access to the interpretation of the rules through the referral mechanism. I think that will be key to make sure that we are, where there is that ambiguity and we feel there is ambiguity, that we are not stepping into being that quasi-regulator role, that we are able to get quick and early interpretation from the regulator about the intent behind those rules so that we can apply it to the individual specifics of the case. I think that, for me, is what's going to be really important. And also that process is open and transparent, so people can see the requests, they can see the answer that comes back, and then the individual consumer can see how it's been applied to their case. Okay,
and the government's also going to go ahead with the approach that it set out to provide you for the purposes of as Chief Ombudsman currently, with overall responsibility for determinations by the Financial Ombudsman Service. Can you give us an example of how that would work in practice?
So at the moment, we take, for example, something like unaffordable lending, where we get many thousands of cases, and some stakeholders are concerned that we may not be consistent in terms of the application of those rules. One of the things we want to be able to do is to apply like a decision framework, so to set out our working out as to how we'll consider the relevant rules, the relevant law in arriving at cases, and for that to be delegated throughout the service so that that can be applied by all of the case handlers within the service. So it's about supporting that consistency.
Do you think that will benefit the consumer?
I think it will benefit consumers if we are open and transparent about that, so that when they bring their complaint to the service, they can see how it's likely to be considered. They can understand what is the most relevant evidence to give us in order to be able to make the complaint, and that they are supported through that process. So I think that ability to deal with cases quickly and consistently and explain our working out better to consumers is a positive, yes.
You have a really important role in our system for people, for consumers, many retail consumers who are not expert in financial matters, who bring their problems to the Financial Ombudsman Service in good faith. You have an important role as Ombudsman to rule on those. It's a very important power you have. Are you confident that these changes are going to maintain your independence, or do you worry that consumers will lose out and that you will lose some independence in making these decisions?
I think they will give us the independence. My understanding is of the driver behind some of the proposals is to continue to encourage confidence in financial services. That will only happen if our decision making is rigorous, open and transparent and at pace. And I think there's a number of checks and balances that can be put in place so that everyone can take assurance of that. But in terms of the specific package of reforms, I think it speaks to a lot of criticism of the service over past years and gives a good answer for many consumers. A
lot of the criticism, well, you'll get criticised from both sides, but a lot from the financial services, financial services industry. What's your message to consumers who would be concerned that government reaching into the Financial Ombudsman could mean that they're losing out? I mean, what reassurance can you give, and that you're going to resist any pressure to not stand up for their interests?
I think the impartiality of the service runs throughout the service and all of its staff. It is passionately held by all of my colleagues within the service. We will be open and transparent about our application of powers and our decision making. We'll continue to publish our determinations. We'll continue to produce thematic reports so people can see how we're applying the rules and understand our cases. And they can absolutely be reassured that we'll be there to help them.
Okay, so just back to you, Mr. Coleman. You're an interim chair. If you were to be appointed chair, for argument's sake, I'm not suggesting that you were, not to the world, anyone listening, not that you've applied or anything, we don't know, but if you were to be appointed chair under the new procedure, you're an experienced executive, non-executive, do you think that you'd feel pressure to act on at the government's behest? Just going back to that again, given what we've heard, we've got a team working independently, but do you think that the appointment of chair by, with the government's role in that now?
I believe, notwithstanding the basis on the basis of the appointment that we've already touched on and who and how it happened, I would feel that I could perform that role to ensure the independence of the service, as James has outlined. Okay. And I think that's, as James has already mentioned, and I think, Chair, you've mentioned as well, the role it plays within the financial system, if I refer to it as an ecosystem, the financial services ecosystem, is unique and important. If that's not seen to be robust and independent and impartial, then I think that would be a loss to the overall structure of the system.
When your predecessor came in front of us and was unable to answer certain questions, we were very helped actually by the FCA's oversight, yes, because they were able to provide sort of very detailed information about what had happened on some of the challenges between the chair and the chief executive officer at the time. I won't go to all of that, I won't repeat all of that. So I'm concerned if there is a change of that oversight, that we won't have that ability for you to be open and honest to Parliament. We had a challenge getting openness and honesty. Do you think that's an important aspect of your role as chair and the role of the Financial Ombudsman Service, that you're open and honest to this committee?
Absolutely.
And is that a guarantee that this will continue to be the case?
Certainly from me, yes.
Okay. well, let me go to
I believe on behalf of the service, I should say.
Well, I'm going to bring in Mr. Dean in a moment. But before I do that, Ms. Simmons, you came over in as Chief Executive Officer. Yeah. There's been a bit of a rocky time for the Financial Ombudsman Service. If we just gloss over it momentarily, people can go back and read our previous work on this issue. What are the problems that you found in the service? What have you been focusing on as Chief Executive Officer?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have said there's problems, but there's been a lot that we have been improving on. So, in terms of some of the kind of focus areas that we've taken on board in the last year, is to try and improve the timeliness of our service. So, our people have worked really, really hard to ensure that customers get answers quicker. So, the things that we've done is we've brought kind of the responses that customers receive within 3 months to just under half receive that, and over over 3/4 that receive answers within 6 months. But we are also mindful that there's quite a lot of customers that have been waiting more than 12 months, and we put a really kind of concerted focus on that, and we're hopeful that we'll bring that down to 30% of the figures that we had at the start of the year by really making sure that we're applying our resource and our skills in the right places, and making sure that the customers get the support they need. So
on the backlog and speeding things up.
Absolutely. So
what was leading to that? What did you when you came in and saw what you were inheriting? What did you think had led to it?
Both myself and James have been part of the leadership team for 2 years prior. So we were sort of very focused on the improvements leading up to that point. And actually some of the good things that had been done prior to the appointments a year ago have enabled efficiencies to be delivered through kind of 24-25 and into this year. So what we've done is building on that with continued kind of focus. So we launched our portals during the year, which enables consumers to sort of see where their cases are at and have greater access to understand the information that's been submitted. And we're sort of further improving the way that customers can raise a complaint at the beginning, and we've got some things launching at the beginning of this next financial year. So for me, it's been an evolution in terms of building on what we've had before, making sure we're focusing on the stages of the customer journey that have proven challenging or take too long, to know what we can do to improve it so we reduce that time even further.
We'll go into some of the things around transparency, but we're telling us confidently that there's been more transparent for consumers. But given the reforms that we're discussing with Mr. Dibble-Johnson and Mr. Coleman, are you confident that a consumer who could get a case through now would still be able to do so after the reform package is introduced, or is there a risk that they would not be able to get a complaint through?
No, completely. I mean, we believe that some of the reforms will help that to be a more efficient process as well. So what we're doing is
no change. So there will be nothing that they couldn't. No. So as a consumer, I could come to the FOS with something now. After the reform package, you're confident that I will be able to get through, because there must be some reason for the change. I'm just wondering what you're interpreting as what might not qualify as a case with the FOS.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of as part of the package of reforms, obviously some of that is some a change to the dismissal rules as the ADR regs have kind of have changed. If you don't mind, I'll ask James to talk to that.
Yes. So to illustrate it with some examples, so some of the proposals we are making around the dismissal rules, and they're for consultation, so absolutely still out for consultation. So we dismiss around 800 cases a year out of the sort of 220,000 that we deal with. Sometimes we can't dismiss a complaint, and we have to take it on and we investigate it, but we may not uphold it. And there might be a small number of those cases which in future, if the proposals go through, we might dismiss. So for example, we sometimes get multiple complaints from individuals who are vexatious. They abuse our staff, they make threats to them, they post things online about them. If they bring us a complaint, we will still assess it, but we may determine that actually we're not going to take that case through our process because of the behaviour of that individual.
Right, so they would lose their consumer rights because it's never right to be rude to staff, but that's different to being vexatious, isn't it? So if I could be a very annoyed consumer, getting quite irate about my case. Sometimes we all deal with constituents all the time who have challenges. That can sometimes lead to heightened behaviour, not always excusable, but sometimes understandable. You're saying that even if they've got a really important case, you might refuse to deal with them because of the behaviour of the individual.
We would have the option. We'd obviously look very carefully if there is any vulnerability or...
I was going to say, because the equalities impact of that.
Absolutely. So it would be a discretionary power. So we would absolutely look at the circumstances of the case. But sometimes we have people who bring us multiple dozens and dozens of complaints, which are not in the category you described of being significant complaints or major complaints, and they abuse our staff. So we would like the option to, rather than having to wait for a vexatious complaint, to be able to look at whether the complainant is vexatious. But that's a consultation proposal. We'll absolutely take on board
Mr. Coleman.
And also, I was just going to add, and James, you might want to add, that we do have an escalation process from the point at which we believe they may be. It's not a straight from the point of, if I put vexatiousness to dismissal. We have the opportunity, and we do use that opportunity to apply certain approach channels to remove some of the person-to-person contact and do it more by email and more by document to reduce the pressure or stress that the consumer may be faced. So I just wanted to say the point isn't just a single point. We have tools and approaches that we would seek to use as
think anyone
escalation,
of us
so the
who-
person wouldn't lose those.
Well,
and
we all
wouldn't-
deal with the members of the public who we all support, but we do
Yes.
have ways of doing that. I appreciate that. So just to be clear then, between the two of you, are you expecting fewer consumer cases to be successful? I mean, and is this the only area that you're going to try and possibly take some people out of the system? Is that...
So primarily it's around the dismissals. In terms of success, the vast majority of our cases would still be considered against. We already have to take into account the relevant law, the regulatory rules, so that would continue to be the case. There's nothing intrinsically in the proposals that we're making that ought to change our uphold rate. No.
Okay, so just really narrow it down. So if previous cases that have been successful, are you expecting a percentage of those to not be upheld because of the narrow remit and of having to stick to the FCA's rules?
In my view, not in significant numbers. There might be the occasional case, but not in significant
But you'll
numbers.
and you would monitor that?
Yes,
And
absolutely. And we've committed to being open about referral rates, numbers of cases, uphold rates. We publish all of that information. We'll continue to do so.
I'm going to go to Mr. Dean in a moment, but finally, just on the recruitment timetable for the permanent chair, all permanent positions, you're all interim. Uncomfortable for an organisation to have this many interims for this length of time. What's the timetable, Ms. Simmons, for recruitment for your permanent position?
It's a matter.
Well, maybe I should,
the wrong way round. Yeah, so Mr.
So
Coleman,
I should take that.
what's the plan?
So as we stand today, the FCA still has the appointment right for my role. When I came on board, it was to try and support the organisation through the generation of the reform package, which you've seen announced this week. So I would expect now that FCA will be discussing with HMT, because Treasury do have an approval right as we stand today over that appointment, and I would expect that they will be having that discussion over the next number of weeks and months.
But the thing is, they have to legislate for these new changes to appoint the chair direct would require legislation. So what you're suggesting, I'm getting understanding, is that there would be another chair appointed. The permanent chair currently appointed under the old process.
There may be.
So you don't know.
I don't know, and that will be a matter for FCA with Treasury.
So it could be with legislation. How long? I mean, quite a long. If you could be interim for a very long time, if it's the new process that appoints your successor.
They would. I have a term to my current appointment, and they would have to come and ask to extend that. They would have to have a discussion with me, clearly, if I was willing to do that. And I'm not suggesting for a second that I wouldn't be, but they would have to come, because that's a limited time appointment at this point in time.
Remind us the timetable. What's the end date of
that was 1 year from my appointment. So my appointment goes from October 25 to October 26.
Okay. So I think we're all cynics about how long legislation takes. It's unlikely there'll be anything in place. So we need to. Well, we'll talk to the FCA and others about this. And what about Ms.
For the
Simmons'
executive
position?
roles, it's slightly awkward with the two individuals.
Well, you're in front of a committee. You just have to. They can watch it on the telly if they weren't here.
Yes.
So tell us anyway.
The current approach there is that is for the FOS board to decide and recommend with oversight from the FCA. So now we've got the package announcement done. I will be taking those discussions forward with the FCA. And so therefore I would want to be able to make permanent appointments to those roles, because I think it's important for the organisation as well to have permanent leaders in those roles going forward.
I think we would all agree with that. So, and given that your term is up in October of this year, can I surmise that we would hope that you might have made appointments by then?
Yes, I can't. It would be wrong of me to guarantee a time
Absolutely,
scale.
we
Obviously,
appreciate you've got other people to talk to.
I would not want to be hanging about in that regard.
Okay. So we've got, in summary, the changes that are being proposed mean that potentially some people will have cases not taken up by the Financial Ombudsman Service that would have done. Is that a fair summary of?
I think, as James said, a small number, we believe.
Okay, so there could be consumer detriment to those people.
Whether or not the detriment is whether or not the complaint would have been one that would have been upheld. Some of the complaints which do come through, which we might be dismissing in future, may not be complaints that go anywhere.
That's easy for you to say. I mean, I just think that for the consumer, though, they will never know whether that might have been upheld.
Absolutely.
Mr. Bobby Dean.
Thank you, Chair. Can we move on to case volumes that are coming through? And perhaps these questions are for you, Ms. Simmons. I was looking at the figures, and for 25-26, I think you was hoping to resolve 270,000. and now the forecast is that it'll be about 235,000, which is not far from the figure that you did achieve in 24-25, kind of an incremental improvement. But then next year we're hoping to jump up to 245. And so the obvious question is, have you actually got the resources to deliver on that figure?
Yeah, so a big variable kind of year on year is our motor finance commission cases. So over the last 2 years, we've done quite a lot of preparatory work in terms of on those cases, but haven't been able to get them to resolution because of some of the legal and regulatory kind of matters that have been ongoing. We're hopeful, and you will have seen that in terms of our proposal for next year, is that we are able to close a significant volume of that, so 60,000. So that makes up a big portion of the additional resolutions next year, but we've done an awful lot of work ahead of time to get ready for that. So that's why you see a sort of a bit of a shift year on year. It's sort of a timing between when big chunks of the work are done versus when the cases can actually be resolved for customers all the way to the end.
If you could explain a bit more detail, because when I look at the breakdown here, we've got motor finance totals and non-motor finance totals,
yeah.
And so you had 10,000 budgeted and you resolved 15,000, so more. And then non-cases 260 versus 220. And are you saying that the difference in that non-FC totals is because you was doing lots of preparatory work that doesn't show up in the resolution of cases but took up a lot of your time?
Yeah, there is some of that, and then the other part that we've sort of the trend that we've seen this year is that we've had fewer easier to close cases and more cases that have been referred to ombudsman decision. So that's meant that the cases that our organisation has been working have taken slightly longer in terms of on an individual basis because they've just have a greater degree of complexity. And then there's been sort of a greater degree of cases that have been referred to an ombudsman for further kind of review of the case. So, and it's just the sort of, that's the challenge with a demand-led business in terms of being able to sort of anticipate the mix of cases that we're going to receive and make sure that we plan appropriately in terms of the organisation size that's needed. So it's more kind of in terms of that, shift from year to year. In terms of the volume that we are anticipating delivering by the end of this financial year, won't be far off the total that we did in 24-25, albeit some of them have greater levels of complexity in terms of on average.
If the numbers remain stubbornly high and the complexity is increasing, then there'll be obviously a concern about the quality of the resolutions that you're now finding, because if you need to try and churn through this volume and it's complex, surely that will undermine the consideration that's given to each of these cases.
No, not at all. Quality is a really high priority in terms of for our casework staff to focus on, and our kind of the target that we set, and we actually keep exceeding it. So we're very kind of happy with the quality of the cases that our workers provide. So it's about how we get both. So the focus is about how we make it easier for our casework colleagues to do their job. So it's not about that they spend less time on the really important, thoughtful consideration of the information that's provided. It's about taking out some of the more administrative tasks that they have to do, so they can focus the time that they do have on kind of that sort of higher level sort of thoughtful consideration.
So you're here in front of the Treasury Select Committee today. You could make a plea for more resources if you needed it. You don't think you do? You think you can cope with the resources you've got?
Well, we have a plan for sort of an increase into next year, but it's always that balance in terms of the anticipation of what we expect to get. Because in the upcoming year, an awful lot of the cases, a big chunk of the cases, we've already done the preparatory work. The uptick in resource we need to achieve the overall volume isn't as high as it would otherwise be.
And in terms of efficiencies, obviously everybody's talking about how AI can assist, particularly on the administrative side of it.
Yeah.
What is the FOS's use of AI at the moment? Is it integrated fully into it, or is it something that staff are dipping their toes into? What are your plans?
Yeah, so we do use AI in the organisation, primarily to automate some of the more administrative tasks, so summarising documents, in terms of on the more of on the support side of the fence, using like Copilot to kind of make sure reports can be more readily produced, sort of kind of to a good quality quicker. On the casework side, it's around things like being able to automatically allocate our cases to the best caseworker. So we look at kind of the profile of the cases that come in and try and match that to the best skills of the caseworkers that we have, so they get routed to the right place. place. So the AI helps with that. So it's more about how we make the process efficient rather than any decision making. We don't have any AI in our decision making process. It's more about the process of how we get casework to the right colleagues and enabling them to do it kind of in less time in terms of helping them manage documentation, if you like.
And is this staff making general use of publicly available tools, or have you put investment into closed systems of your own? Or
yeah, we've changed strategy over the last 12-18 months. We did have an earlier sort of foray in where we were trying to build our own kind of machine learning, and whilst we did get value from that, obviously it's challenging, and AI evolved quite a lot. So our strategy now is to use more sort of off-the-shelf tooling, and our core casework management system is Microsoft Dynamics, and our core workforce management system is Workday, and both of those platforms have got an AI roadmap, and so we're looking at the AI products that come with those platforms, and I'm very much looking to leverage those to help improve the efficiency of some of the areas of work that we do.
So using those off-the-shelf platforms, can you reassure us about data protection issues? Because clearly if you're feeding people's personal financial details into an open system,
it's not. We don't allow any of our data to go outside of our perimeter.
Yes, guys. Brilliant. And Mr. Dipple-Johnson, I wonder if I could speak to you about whether or not you think you've got enough capacity at that sort of senior ombudsman level as well, because people often feel like when they go to an ombudsman, they want an ombudsman to make a determination. We know that's not always the case. So can you tell us if you think you've got sufficient capacity at that end?
So as part of our sort of structure, what we've organised ourselves into is to directorates based on themes of casework. So, for example, fraud and scams, consumer credit, pensions, investments and insurance, but also a mass claims directorate as well to deal with things like the car commission cases. Within that, we've got a mix of ombudsmen and also investigators, and to provide that flexibility you describe, we also have associate ombudsmen who are contractors who work with us, and we have also got operational performance managers who support us in terms of managing teams. So to illustrate it, over the past year, where we've seen the higher referral rate coming through with more people asking for an ombudsman's determination, what we've done is release some of the ombudsmen who are managing teams of investigators to focus on issuing decisions to help more customers at decision stage, and we've backfilled them with team managers, the operational performance managers, who don't do decisions but actually just focus on managing the investigators.
So as a proportion of people that request an ombudsman decision versus the ones that actually get one, do you keep figures on that, and has that figure been declining or?
No, we've actually seen more people request an ombudsman's decision, and we've been issuing more ombudsman's decisions. Yes, so it's typically run about 17-18%. At times over the course of this year, it's run up to about 20%.
And I think when you was in front of us last year, you told us that staff levels should increase to 3,300 by the end of the year. I think that was at the end of last year. Did you make that figure? What's the progress looking like?
It's about 3,200 when we look at kind of our fixed term contracts and our contingent workforce that we use in terms of our third-party contract.
Okay. And any further targets for next year?
Are we going up slightly in terms of to manage? So whilst, yes, I mean, obviously your point you raised earlier about the increase in resolutions, we obviously will need more staff, but not as many for the reasons that I articulated. So
you've done the prevention work. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. A quick one from Mr. Glenn.
Yeah, can I just follow up on AI? Some would say that actually AI should be used to make decisions, and it could be more accurate than human decision making. So you were very anxious, you were very careful to say, well, AI doesn't make decisions. But can you see a world where that would be appropriate, given the way technology is improving and human error also occurs?
Yeah, potentially. I think there's some foundations that we need to get in place first. So we need to make sure that we've got really clear decision frameworks, so we know what the logic is in terms of that is applied in order to reach a decision, and that is kind of being done in conjunction with some of the reforms in terms of understanding what the kind of the logic needs to be. But the thing, whilst we will be able to, and probably be able to automate more. For us, it's still important that there's a human that looks at it, so it's almost like AI assisted, because of the individual circumstances of the case that need to be considered. It's not going. We don't envisage it's going to be something you can fully automate.
I was just going to come in. I think the point Jenny makes is really important because we're making decisions on individual complaints. It's quite possible you could have two individual complaints which are so unbelievably similar, but there's just one factor that differentiates between two complaints, and it might be a vulnerability, it might be another aspect, which might cause that complaint to be upheld in one circumstance and not upheld in another. I think we'd want to be, to your very question, highly confident that if we were introducing AI in decisioning, that it would pick up on nuances and differences, unique differences like that, so that if a human was looking at those two and could see that difference and would make a different judgment, that the AI would equally reflect that.
I mean, all I would say is that the Chancellor made a speech yesterday where she spoke a lot about AI and its importance to the government's growth initiative. And, I totally I think everyone would understand the point you've just made. But there is a point of AI taking you to that narrow point where then humans intervene to actually improve the efficiency, surely, massively of your organisation. So people don't need to fear it, but you could use it to get to that point where those differentiations, AI helps you draw out those, surely.
And I think it's not from a position of fear we'd approach this, certainly to the challenge. It's a position of us gaining confidence as we move through, that as we would introduce it, that at each step and stage we'd introduce it, we'd be absolutely confident that it wouldn't miss those types of issues.
Just finally, are you making sure that AI being used by people writing to you is caught? Because there are some odd things that happen, hallucinations, and there's people writing cases
absolutely
better or differently.
Chair, to your point, we've seen feedback from industry, from the complaints departments of a number of financial services firms, and some of them have spoken to me, who have seen the individual volume of a complaint. So what comes along with a complaint letter, maybe, is the easiest way to explain it. The volume of supporting material go up by a factor of 10 plus. Are
they all real, Kate, or is it all real? And Mr. Dipple-Johnson's shaking his head vigorously, for the record.
No. And we have seen similarly. I don't think we're quite seeing the volume that financial services firms are seeing at this point in time, but I would suspect we will see that volume increasing, but we're already seeing some of that, which is AI generated, more often than not quoting legal cases that may or may not be relevant to the particular complaint. And it is a challenge, it is a current challenge we're facing into from investigators and from ombudsmen, who then have to work through that to make sure that we're not in any way ignoring any of it, but what is relevant and what is not relevant. So that volume of what comes with a complaint has definitely increased.
Lots we could delve into there, but I'm going to ask Mr. Luke Murphy to
yes.
now. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. Buy now, pay later issues coming into your regulatory perimeter from July 2026. You're expecting 2,000 cases, I believe the statement made. Is that just in that year? Is it per year in future?
No, just in that year. I think we recognise, and I know colleagues can speak to this because they've been in the service much longer than me, but I think you tend to see a scenario where when something is brought into the remit of the regulator and therefore falls to be part of our service, that takes a time from the point at which it's brought into the regulatory remit for complaints to flow through. So that would be for the year in consideration. It would be highly likely to increase, I think we feel.
Do you have estimates for how it might look in the trajectory following?
Not beyond this year, but we've spoken to other financial ombudsmen around the world who've taken on similar products in their jurisdiction, and that's the basis of our planning. Is they've seen an initial slow take up, but then it building quite considerably on the back of that, which is why we've said we'll monitor the situation really carefully.
And for those consumers where the regulatory perimeter was not in place for when their issues might be that they're coming to you for, do you have a strategy for dealing with those? Because there's going to be quite a lot of accumulated, and how is your setup going to triage those? Is it to ensure that you are focusing on those that do have relevant issues with regard to when the perimeters come in?
Yeah, so if I may, so we've been running a project over the past year to prepare for this, looking at how we can improve the front door to the service to absolutely help people understand whether the case is one that falls within our jurisdiction, but also make it easier for people to raise complaints with us. One of the facets that we are particularly interested in keeping across is around the affordability, because it may well be a product that people have multiple instances of, and therefore some might be completely within jurisdiction, some might be at the border, and others might not. But actually, it's the whole pattern that we need to look at to understand some of the considerations. But what we want to do is make sure that the front door of the service is as easy for people to use and is really clear about our jurisdiction.
If you're a consumer and you've taken out one of these products through a merchant-owned avenue versus a third party, do you think it is going to make intuitive sense as to why you can cover one but not the other?
I think that'll be part of the challenge in terms of being clear with people. We've got a lot of experience of explaining our jurisdiction. Our jurisdiction isn't as straightforward in many areas and has evolved over time, and we'd apply the same principles. We've been speaking to some of the consumer groups as well who support people in this space to learn from them and understand how they're engaging with their clients so that we can apply similar techniques ourselves.
Do you think the exclusion of merchant-owned products is sensible?
I think we'll see when we get the cases coming through. I might have more information next year.
Okay.
There's a list of questions for us already written there. Thank you for that, Mr. Mr. Murphy.
Just moving on to crypto asset activities coming into the perimeter, what is that going to mean for the service?
So yes, again, we are in a similar ways. We've been working on the buy now, pay later. We've been looking at what we might do if crypto comes within our perimeter and when that might come in, and also what kind of cases we deal with. At the moment, we mainly see crypto-based complaints as part of a fraud or a scam payment journey, where somebody's been incentivized to purchase crypto or to make a transfer through their crypto wallet. So we've got some experience of the kind of technology that's out there. What we're seeking to do is understand more, work with the FCA to understand how their rules are going to interact with the sector, but also prepare to make the service, and it speaks to what Jenny was describing before, as digitally enabled as possible, because in these particular cases, quite a lot of the evidence we need ought to be readily available in a digital format. So the easiest way for people to get into our service and bring us their complaints is what we're interested in providing.
The gateway opens in September, but you've not incorporated any estimates into the current 26-27 budget. Is that sensible?
Yes, until we know more about it, but we will obviously keep the situation under review as we go through and see how many firms are taking up, how many are coming in, how many customers they've got.
And just moving on to targeted support, in the joint statement with the FCA, you said you would deliver a consistent and proportionate dispute resolution approach to targeted support. Do you have any idea when you're going to deliver that?
So we probably expect these complaints might take a little time to come through, because obviously the support has to be given, acted upon, something has to go wrong, and then a complaint has to be dealt with by the firm and then come through to us. But the model we're applying within the service is very similar to that which we applied with the PSR when they introduced the new fraud and scams changes around APP, which is to engage with consumer groups, engage with industry, understand how the rules are being applied, and then sharing examples of how we propose to look at these cases as they come through. And with that, we provided case studies and case examples so that parties could understand our likely approach. And we anticipate a similar model this time around.
And if just very quickly I could just return back to that question about merchant-owned on buy now, pay later. I mean, in your experience, with one area being covered and one not, could you foresee kind of greater innovation in the merchant-owned space, which going to require regulatory catch-up? I mean, I think that's one of my concerns about its exclusion. Can you say any more about your concerns in that area? Or?
I think it's something we're going to have to keep across the pace of, very much. We are constantly looking to see what's happening. I think our starting point would be is it needs to be clear and easy for consumers to understand what their redress options are, I should say, and to be able to access our service as quickly as they can if they need to.
And I was just going to add, I think there's an important feature, and it touches on a few of the questions that you've asked around the sectors that you've touched on in your questioning, of the feedback loop that will and needs to exist between us and the FCA as regulator in those spaces, to ensure that we're feeding back, and we do, the data and the behaviours we're seeing through our complaint process back into the FCA, because ultimately the FCA can then decide if it wants to review its regulation in that space, and to your point, the perimeter and what sits inside and outside. So we do see it as an important function of what we do alongside investigating the complaints, that we're taking, if I call it learning, but data and learning and information from that and feeding it back into the FCA process so they can consider any changes they may want to make as well.
Can I just ask a bit about how does that process work? Are you invited explicitly by the FCA to provide that feedback? Is it an ongoing? It's
ongoing.
Yeah.
It's at a number of levels. I mean, James and the team interact at a number of levels with the regulator in terms of that feedback piece. The chair's already mentioned the oversight committee, and at the most strategic level, we have that feedback loop opportunity in the oversight committee structure that we use as well. But James, I didn't know
Yeah,
you want to touch on.
we also have some referral gateways where we can refer issues directly through to the regulator, either to put the issue, as it were, on their radar, or to seek interpretation, or to highlight our concerns. So we have a number of mechanisms through which we can do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr Murphy. Catherine West MP.
Thank you very much, Chair. Still on operational matters, Mr Tippel-Johnston, during the financial year 2024 to 2025, the independent assessor found a dramatic increase in cases where customers' complaints about the FOS concern service standards and a significant decrease in cases deemed to be satisfactory. And you have covered some of this, but I just wondered what you would say the broad explanation for that trend would be.
So we deal with about 220,000 cases a year. Around about 3,500 make a service complaint through to us, and a few hundred then go through to the independent assessor. Typically, the kinds of complaints that come up is poor communication between our staff and the customer, a lack of clarity, a failure to meet commitments made, that will call somebody back on a particular date, and a lack of explanation in terms of how we've approached their case. What we do is we take that into the service. We look for those trends and patterns. Some of that is about retraining for colleagues, supporting them. Some of that is about how our systems work. We have had a lot of complaints historically about the delay. The service has taken too long to get back to people. I appreciate that's hugely frustrating if people are waiting for an answer, which is why we've invested in improving the pace. But actually, we want to make it easier for people to complain about us as well. So we are trying to support people to give us feedback, act upon that feedback and improve the service.
And the independent assessor has ongoing concerns about how vulnerable consumers are treated, and we've spoken a little bit about the difference between a vexatious person, which obviously there are correct procedures for dealing with, but what would you say, is there, what further room for improvement might there be? So you've done some, but what more steps could be taken? So
we've put around 2,000 of our staff through vulnerability training over the past year. So we've taken people out of the business for a period of time, gone through vulnerability training. We've actually seen an increase in terms of our capture and our identification of vulnerability, which is kind of the starting point for that, to be able to have those conversations with customers, record their needs, and then deliver those needs. Dame Gillian's feedback to me is that we're still getting that wrong, where we're not seeing the person behind the process. And that's where we're really doubling down at the moment, to try and make sure we're seeing the person, not just the process.
Can I just add to that? Because it's a really important point. When I came into the service, we embarked on a review of the governance committee structure that sits below the board in the FOS, and we've just changed that, and we're in the process of establishing it. It will first sit in a few weeks, a reform and customer experience committee that I will chair. Part of its remit will be to guide the organisation through the implementation of the reform package, but its substantive form going forward will be looking at the customer experience, and that will be part of its remit in terms of looking at that, at the vulnerability and how vulnerable customers are treated through that. So I just wanted to add that, because I think we felt it's important at the board level, at strategic leadership, to make sure we've got to focus on that. I'm sure
Dame Lynn would have some examples of some of the utility companies used to be awful and have actually improved, so they're just saying, could I just double check if there's any vulnerability? So for example, where we've had works being done, it's finding out what yes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms West. John Grady.
Well, thank you very much, Dame Meg. Maybe some questions to Ms Simmons. You obviously introduced the fees for claims management companies, and there's been a very significant drop in the number of claims since you introduced the charge. So how have you gone about assessing the impact of this change on vulnerable customers? Do you have any data?
Yeah, we do track that, and actually we get the increase. We've had an increase in the complaints that come directly to us from vulnerable customers. So some of that might be because we're better identifying the said customers, but our full impact assessment is sort of due kind of a year after launch, which is coming in Q1. So we haven't kind of completed that analysis yet. But we're not seeing any adverse impact as a result in terms of on the preliminary information that we have.
And as part of that impact assessment, are you actually going out and surveying customers and understanding customer behaviour from the point of view of some customers might prefer to go to a claims management company because they just don't know how the system operates or all the rest of it, doing some sort of on-the-ground survey of customers? Is that a question for Mr. Dibble-Johnston?
So we will try and get as much information about the earlier stages of the complaints process as possible. Sometimes we're limited through things like data protection and understanding customers who didn't come to us and their experience, but that's the kind of thing we want to look at. We also want to understand what issues have come through, how quickly we've been able to look at the issues, and what kinds of cases we haven't seen. We saw particularly last year a significant growth in complaints about irresponsible and unaffordable lending, a large proportion of which were then withdrawn or abandoned. So we want to understand a little bit more around the cases we're seeing now, what's making them come through. We've still seen about 85% of the customers who are vulnerable come to us direct, and we want as many people to come to us and find it easy to use as possible.
I suppose, Mr. Coleman, as chair, the exam question here is actually quite simple. Are we confident that this change is not shutting off vulnerable people from the FOS? And I guess that is something you need to study in this impact assessment. Are you confident that the impact assessment itself and the work in preparation of that will give us a robust answer to answer that question?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. Just in terms of the metrics, you've seen this drop off. What's the sense of the FOS, again, maybe Mr. Dibble-Johnston, as to whether you're seeing less meritorious complaints fall away and better evidence complaints forming a larger proportion? Are you seeing a reduction in poorer complaints, or what's the mix? What's your take on that?
So it's early days, as I say, we're going to carry out the review, but what we've seen is the proportion of withdrawn abandons fall away, and the uphold rate for represented complaints begin to come more into alignment with the uphold rate for individuals who come to us directly. So it suggests, early days, but it suggests that greater due diligence is being done on the cases which come through.
Okay. And what discussions do you have with claims management companies about case management and so on? You get feedback from the individual users. Yep. What's the feedback they're giving you?
So we get feedback from individual claims management companies in the day-to-day interactions on cases, but also we regularly meet with the trade associations. I think we've had a couple of meetings over the course of the past year, and also with some of the firms working on particular issues. So we will include that as part of the feedback that we give forward.
And then on to a separate topic but related, which is your funding model. Now you're talking about differentiated fees from April 2027, and there's various ways you can do that, stages or complexity. Are you able to shed any light on which direction we're going on that?
Yeah, so obviously
Jenny Simmons.
Yeah, sorry, we consulted on that as part of the 26-27 budget, and we got really clear feedback that there was a high level of support for differentiating by stage, because I think it was understood that stage represents the amount of work that we've done, and it's right that where more work is required, that perhaps a greater fee should be charged. The bit that we're going to be working through is understanding what the right price points are in terms of in regard to that sort of differentiation. So that's what we'll be working through in conjunction with sort of understanding some of the impacts of the reform work in November when we consult on our 27-28 budget.
How would you set, is that price point related, would you say, to the value of the claim or something else, or is it just the overall
it's regards to the cost to us of doing the work. Yeah,
Right, okay.
that's a primary because we're a not-for-profit organisation, and so our funding needs to cover the costs that we incur to do the work.
And presumably, actually, lower value cases take up as much time as higher value cases.
They can do.
Yeah.
And if you streamline processes in future, how easy is it to change the fee structure? Remind me, is that...
Well, this is the good thing about, in terms of some work we've been doing this year to develop a new billing system, which is going to launch in April. What that does is simplify matters and the billing logic that we have, so that when we sort of want to implement differentiation subject to consultation, that we will have the foundations there in our new billing system that makes it much easier to do so, both upon initial launch, but then also to adjust price points in the future beyond that as well.
What tolerance do you have on price points that you can just do without consultation? I mean, can you uprate?
We consult on all price points.
You have to always consult, so any
Yeah.
change, so you've got to get it right first time.
Yes.
So thank you. Mr. Grady.
Our final question, really, or final set of questions anyway, is on the cutting the interest rate from 8% to bank base plus 1. How are you going to set about monitoring whether this leads to firms delaying resolving cases? Because the cost of them is lower. They don't have to pay the 8%, they pay base plus 1.
Yeah, so we will monitor the pace at which we're getting through cases and when cases are being resolved. We are also improving the amount of detail we gather about the awards that we make. At the moment, we categorise them into bands. We're going to be recording much more detail as to exactly how much we've awarded and what the interest is on top of that. What we've also been doing, just to be clear, in terms of that interest rate, where the consumer can demonstrate the loss they've incurred, so they've had to put money on their credit card or they've had to take out a loan, then they will absolutely get that level of interest, that amount in their award. And if firms delay making the payment, they will get the 8%. So if we've set out a time by which you should make the payment, if they don't make that payment, then the 8% applies.
So if I'm making a complaint to the FOS, and I'm not, don't worry, but if I am, I can...
Right, Mr. Grady.
Which is my right, Dave, quite right,
Yes.
that is my right. But if I do make a complaint to the FOS and I can show that I've put it on my credit card, and I've had to because of my own individual circumstances, I'll be able to get that higher rate because that's part of my loss.
Yes, we would seek to put you back into the position you would have been, yes.
And do you think, because obviously, do you think customers and complainers understand that? Do you think that's clear enough to them that they can make a claim for that head of loss?
It's part of our process to work with people to understand what their complaint is about. So yes, I think most people who come to us ought to know.
How have you tested that understanding?
Just in terms of feedback we get about the service and whether the awards are upheld. The awards are accepted by the complainants. But
Thank you very much.
Meg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grady. Right Honourable John Glenn MP.
Thank you. I just want to try and get to the heart of this issue of what I think will be perceived as a trade-off between things that industry will welcome because it's more efficient and consumers that will fear because their protections are less. And I see there's a quote from Simon Morris from CMS and the FT today where he says, "The Ombudsman has for too long been a loose cannon firing out random decisions that firms have had to treat as quasi-precedents. Industry will welcome Treasury's package." Now, such a comment, I'll invite you to respond to that in a moment, but will give consumers the sense that there's a trade-off, and one of those items is the 10-year limit, for example, which for some categories like pensions and mortgages will mean that they apparently aren't going to have those protections. So, firstly, how would you respond to that sentiment expressed in Simon's quote, and what would you say about on that 10-year thing for consumers?
So in terms of the first, my understanding and sort of our ambition through the reforms is to provide a better service. And so through that, ensure that there's confidence from consumers in terms of financial services. So anything that doesn't speak to that is a concern. We don't set precedent, and we're not the regulator, and we shouldn't be acting. Sometimes people accuse us of being the quasi-regulator because we're the ones who have to take the rules and apply them to individual cases. We want to be more open and transparent about how we're arriving at our decisions so that both parties, we're impartial to both parties involved in the complaint can understand how we've arrived at that decision, working through the individual facts of the case.
Would you accept at this point, Mr. Dipple-Johnston, that is the received wisdom of many financial services firms and law firms representing people, that they see a decision from the FOS and they think, well, we know where this is going to go, and this has caused a lot of frustration?
Yes, firms do share that view with me, which is why we want to be clearer and more transparent about how we've arrived at decisions. But also to your precedent point, which was within your question there, we don't seek to take precedent or to make precedent. We publish our determinations, and sometimes when people play back to me what they've taken from our determinations, it is slightly confusing because that's not necessarily what we intended by that particular case. That nuance we described about the individual facts of the case gets lost.
That's your view. That's not the received wisdom in the marketplace, is it?
We get lobbied all the time, as you would expect, and there's the constant refrain from the finance.
I mean, I just want you to zone in on this trade-off point, because the government haven't made these changes because they want it to remain as it is, and in the end there is a trade-off. Now, I get that you don't want to create a headline today that is going to say that there's a trade-off, but there must be. I mean, but we're trying to get to what's the bottom line of these changes. What's the best thing you can do to tell us about what's going on here?
So in terms of these changes, the best thing is about us being more open and transparent about how we've arrived at decisions, and we apply them consistently, which is why, for example, we want to produce the thematic reviews so that we can share the learning that should be taken from our cases as a theme rather than in individual cases. Turning to your point about the 10 years.
Thank you.
So this is a proposal from the Treasury's review. It would obviously require Parliament's consent. It would require primary legislation to be able to take that through. And my understanding from the Treasury document is that there is an intent that there should be some categories of complaint that might not fall within that 10-year limit. And the kind of thing is exactly as you said, the kind of thing we would recommend would be considered as part of that would be things like pensions, long-term investments and mortgages, where by the very nature of those products, concerns about them might happen quite late in the day.
Yeah.
And consumer organisations would perhaps say that if poorly evidenced claims are made, that might say something about the individual's circumstances and capacity to make a claim. How would you avoid the most vulnerable in society being essentially frozen out from making a legitimate claim from a position of less awareness and language and knowledge, etc.?
Yeah. So we're doing more as a service, and we can do more as a service to raise awareness about the service. I think there's more the point at which consumers get responses from their financial services provider to make it easier to bring your complaint through to the service and signpost to the service so that people can come to us. We've also got to continue to strive to make it easier to access the service, improve the front door, improve the support we provide to vulnerable consumers.
But, I mean, I've got no doubts about your professionalism personally, but the question of this openness and transparency, if it results in individuals not being able to get their case looked at, that is a little comfort, is it? They're not going to be comforted by that assertion. I mean, how do are you saying that the broad needs of the consumer, as up to this point, will be met in exactly the same outcome, even if there are slight tweaks to the process as happened so far? I mean, what can you say about the consumer's end point following these changes?
Yeah, so two things. So I think first and foremost is we want to make it easier for those consumers to come through to us. So more people might find it easier to come through to the service and have their case looked at, and their case responded to quickly, at pace, to the right quality standards. Yeah. Secondly, we'll be able to share more about the cases that we've seen so that you can hold us to account in terms of our uphold rates, what kinds of issues we've looked at, and so we can share the learning so people can have their complaint resolved at local stages of the complaints process without having to come through to the Ombudsman, so that there is that virtuous circle of feedback and learning happening within the overall system.
Would you characterise this as a strengthening of the consumer's rights in any way?
I think there's a lot of strength in, for example, things like the thematic reviews. So being able to take a category of complaints and say, this is what we've seen, this is how we've looked at them, this is what we think firms ought to do, and to be able to share that. At the moment, we do it individually with individual firms on individual cases. It doesn't cut through at that level. So to be able to produce a thematic review, like some other ombudsmen do, I mean, the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, for example, has done great work extrapolating from individual sepsis cases into a national sepsis campaign to improve the quality of healthcare. So
really
that
stopping
kind of
things
impact.
downstream, coming to in the first place.
Exactly
so
right.
Quite hard to measure, potentially.
But a benefit for consumers.
If you can measure it, how will you measure it?
Well, I think that's where the system's got to work between the data at local stages of the complaints process, feedback from the regulator, and also what we're seeing coming through here.
Who will that data go to? It will go to presumably the FCA.
The FCA has a lot of data about local stages of the complaints process. We have some from our stages. There's always more we can do to link those two together.
And the thematic reviews, I think, is important to point out as well. The ambition there is to become more joined up so that we can speak with the FCA and the thematic reviews they'll participate in as well. So if there is, you've seen the proposal for a referral mechanism in the proposed legislative package, that's important to ensure, and it speaks to your points around how we make sure that the regulator and their regulatory responsibilities are clear and defined, and how the Ombudsman's service and what we do is clear and defined. And if it's a matter for regulatory interpretation, it's the regulator that has the responsibility to do that, and therefore decisions we may take are not imputing a regulatory appetite in that space. And I'm sure some of the challenge that some of the lobbying you may have received speaks to that space about decisions that we may take on an individual case being imputed to apply to a whole range of other cases as well.
So just final question then. You don't think the vulnerable consumer or the consumer rights organisation that works and advocates for those individuals has anything to fear from these changes?
No.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Bobby Dean, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a clarifying question to begin with, which is these thematic reviews you talk about, this is distinct from the lead complaint process that might be used for mass redress events?
That's
Fine.
correct, yes.
Yeah, just obviously they have similarities in that you're going to
They
be
do,
looking
yes.
at a group of complaints together. So on the lead complaints process, it seems on the face of it a sensible idea that we're going to sort of look at these new batch of cases together, make a determination that guides future decisions and gives people more certainty over the long run. Of course, there could be some unintended consequences of this, not least the fact that it might add more time delay into the process. And I guess there's fears from some consumer groups that this will be weaponised. People know that if you delay justice, people drop out of that process very often. So what safeguards are you going to have in place to stop companies from using this as a tactic, really, trying to get rolled into a lead complaints process, kick it down the road, people give up?
Yeah, so we absolutely don't want that to happen. We are out to consult on this on a proposal, and the kind of things that we might consider putting in place are things like a time limit. So in terms of how long we would take to consider a case, and if it takes longer than that, then obviously we could release it from that process and deal with the individual cases. But also it would require firms to cooperate with us in terms of providing the information and helping us carry out our investigations quickly and effectively. But to the point about delaying things
quickly if it's not in their interest to do so.
Well, in which case they wouldn't benefit from the lead case approach.
So you think it's in their interest to cooperate with this quickly? And then obviously you're going to be taking a representative sample. How do you put safeguards in place to make sure it is going to be a representative sample? Nobody gets to look inside the FOS box, really. The financial firms, they'll have full sight of all the complaints against them, but the individual consumers won't. And so there is a fear that there could be a selection of cases brought together that don't actually support the strongest consumer case possible.
If that were the case, then any subsequent complaints that we get through would be picked up, because people would be able still to bring us their complaint. The firm would not benefit from the insight as to how we're looking at that issue, and we would therefore, on the case-by-case basis, be able, and we'd obviously raise that with the regulator as part of our reporting criteria.
I guess there's a tension here, because you need to deal with each complaint on its own individual merits. But the lead complaints process almost inherently is trying to set a precedent, isn't it, for other cases? So how are you going to actually ensure that a precedent that's been set by the lead complaints process doesn't overrun maybe a more meritful case elsewhere.
Yes, so rather than set precedent, what we're trying to do is provide a guide as to how we might consider that issue. It wouldn't necessarily be in either parties, whether it's a representative or a firm selecting a subset of cases, which then doesn't represent the broader cohort they've got, because those consumers could still come to us irrespective of the lead complaints process.
Yeah.
And if the case hadn't been dealt with in line with our advice through the lead complaints process, then that would be potentially upheld. So it would be self-defeating.
And in terms of transparency, how do we check your homework on this? How do we make sure that once you've chosen a selection of cases and come to a determination that A, it was the right mix, and B, it was the right outcome?
So we would be reporting on our outcomes as usual, but happy as part of the consultation. If people think that we ought to report individually on these cases and show our working out, then absolutely we'd be happy to do that.
I guess even if it's in private correspondence as a committee, because it's a new process, it would be good to see the workings of some of your first cases that fall under.
On the point of transparency, I'm just bringing Dame Harriet.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. And I have to say that my overall concern this afternoon, Chair, in light of the announcements made by the government earlier this week, is, I always think of the Financial Ombudsman Service as the service that can stand up for my constituents, the little guys, against the big financial services companies. And what worries me, is that I know how extensively the industry has lobbied against the Financial Ombudsman Service. It feels to me, and bearing in mind that all three of you are in interim positions at the moment, it feels to me as though a large amount of your independence is being threatened by these changes. I think we could all say we want to see consistency in decisions. I don't have an issue with that, but we need to be able to monitor on this committee how consistent you're being. So I would strongly want to see transparency in terms of your decisions. And I'm worried about some of the things that you're being asked to change, like the time limits. And I'm worried about the way in which all three of you as interims, I haven't heard you kick up any kind of fuss or concern about the level of independence you're having wrenched from you as a result of these changes. So could you confirm that you will continue to publish things, will be transparent to this committee? And then specifically around consumer duty, which I believe you've been able to look at complaints around consumer duty for a few years now. Tell us what kind of complaints you're getting from those little guys, our constituents, who have complaints against consumer duty. And I think that's probably the Chief Ombudsman, the interim Chief Ombudsman for now, on the consumer duty, and then the Chair on the independent.
So Mr. Dibble-Johnston.
Yeah.
In terms of the consumer duty, we see a whole range of complaints coming through that involve the consumer duty, because it applies to quite a lot of our casework now in terms of what's coming through. Particular issues we've been looking at, so we're starting to get some issues around fair price and value coming through in terms of whether the product offered a fair value to the consumer. And we're continuing to investigate those too. We're also looking at some of the communication issues coming through on some of the products. Does the consumer understand the product? Is it the right product for them? Has it been marketed to them appropriately? So we're seeing a wide variety of consumer duty issues coming through.
Are you publishing the decisions you've come to on that?
We continue to publish all of our determinations. We potentially, through the reforms, we could do specific updates on elements of the consumer duty through a thematic report, so we'd be able to be more open about that in future.
And on the independence, Chair?
Mr. Coleman.
No, I was just going to say to the two questions about transparency and independence there, and your request to ensure that we remain utterly transparent with this committee, then absolutely I would see that as a core responsibility of our sitting in front of you today and moving forward as well. And if there are particular things, as you've mentioned, for instance, on moving forward with those lead case reviews, if there are disclosures that will be helpful for you as the committee to see in more detail, absolutely, we'd be more than happy to provide those. Recognising that some of those, as you've pointed out, are in early stage, but absolutely ensuring that you see that moving forward. To the ultimate independence point, I mean, I think I answered it earlier, but no, I do see the independence of the Financial Ombudsman Service as a fundamental, necessary feature of its ongoing activity. And kicking up a fuss, I think the reform package that's in front of us now does not challenge the ultimate independence of the FOS. I think we can demonstrate that the independence is there at the heart of the organisation.
You'd be prepared to resign if it were?
As a fundamentally...
If you felt that your independence was being threatened?
I don't ultimately believe it is a threat.
Between now and October 26, it may not be used in that position.
It may not be.
When these changes come through, well, it's unlikely to be because of the legislative change, isn't it?
It may not be me, as you say, Chair.
It just feels to me, Chair, that we have a government that's dramatically reducing the ability of citizens to have cases seen in front of a jury. Yeah. And I sort of detect a bit of a pattern here that the industry has really got a lot of what it wanted in terms of reducing the independence of the Financial Ombudsman Service and reducing the number of things it can look at. But I'm going to land that as a political point and thank the Chair for giving me the floor.
Yeah. Thank you, Dame Harriet. John Grady, MP.
I may be going over old ground, so apologies, but may I just come back briefly to this lead redress process and follow up from Mr Dean's questions? I'm looking at your flowchart in your consultation from July, and stage 3 investigation says both parties to the complaint will be given the opportunity to contribute their views and evidence. Now, at a financial organisation, they'll have lawyers looking at it, they'll have a whole panoply of experts looking at it, and then there's poor old me with my complaint or one of my constituents. What's happening to even up the balance? I mean, are you going to have some sort of independent advocate for the consumer who sits there, or a KC, or someone who's qualified to kind of make sure that the consumer's side to this is put robustly? Because I'll tell you the thing is, this will elevate the importance of it. I'm quite sure the financial industry will throw the coach and horses at it as a result.
And I think this is... Oh, sorry, apologies.
No, just bring you, Mr. Johnson.
Okay, so this is where the culture within the organisation is so important, because it speaks to our inquisitorial remit as investigators and as ombudsman. And this is absolutely what we've been doing for many years, is testing, verifying what we've been told. We don't require the complainant to put their terms in exactly the same legalistic or technical language as we sometimes see from the respondent firms. We are levelling the playing field in terms of considering cases, and that quality and that rigour and that ethos and that outlook is absolutely what comes through the staff of the service.
For those lead cases, Mr. Dipple-Johnson, if I came along in a year's time and you're sat here having dealt with some of them, I'd be able to ask how much time your staff spent considering the consumer's complaint, and be able to see, for instance, average number of hours spent and seniority, so that I could verify that it matched the sort of thing that would happen on the other side.
We don't record time within the service, but we're absolutely happy to explain on the lead cases and show all of our working out if that would assist the committee, absolutely. I've spent almost all of my working life working in independent complaints handling and investigative bodies, so this isn't about skewing the pitch one way or the other.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. So just to be clear on providing information to this committee, we welcome your offer to do that. Is there any reason, because you're 3 interim appointments, that the system could say, well, you may have said that, but they were interims, we are not going to do this? I'm just making it just be absolutely clear for the record that the organisation, you are speaking for the organisation going forward.
I mean, I would say whilst James and I are interim in these roles, we are permanent employees of the organisation in terms of our kind of substantive role. So, you know, it's an unusual situation, but we are committed to making sure we deliver the best service we can for complainants.
And Chair, I'm just simply going to say yes.
Okay, thank you. And we obviously also sometimes need to treat information we understand sensitively.
Yes.
So we have never leaked anything, and we're not a committee that would do so. We hope that we could receive things on those terms. If necessary, we prefer everything to be in public where it can, but if there were a need for that, because we are very keen to watch this progress. And just on the timetable, so Mr. Coleman, assuming that you just finish your term and you do move on the current timetable, it's likely that the next chair, or whoever the next chair is, will be appointed under the old regime. So what's the term of office normally for a chair appointed substantially? Do you
that is a very good question to which I don't immediately have the answer.
3 or 4 years.
I think it's 3 or 4 years.
Can you just I'm sure we can behind the scenes just count.
I can verify. I will make sure we verify that.
But it would just be helpful to know if there's a plan. Well, we can also question other people about this. Well, there's a plan
it
to
would be
appoint.
incorrect of me to say I don't know from the top of my head what that is, but we're happy to.
It's just I think we're interested to know if your successor will also, or it could be you being an interim for longer, or a successor as another interim, or whether it would be for a full.
Yes, I understand
term.
entirely the basis of the question.
And similarly for Ms Simmons, the CEO doesn't have an appointment period. I don't think, is that right? I think it's just a permanent appointment.
Oh, so it's interim.
But if a permanent appointment was made, there was no time limit.
And recent tenure's been short.
Yes. Let's draw. Well, we've covered that quite a lot in the past, but I'm sure Ms Simmons is hoping to stay. Well, I don't know what your plans are. I'm not going to probe you on that in public. That's not fair. And just to be clear, so the timetable obviously is dependent on legislation, which we discussed earlier. We will take that up elsewhere. So could I ask Mr. Cochran just had a quick question?
Just a quick question. Are any of the panel members of a political party?
No.
Shaking heads all round. Okay, thank you very much. I guess that drives to the independence position, though of course we know many good colleagues of political parties can also be independent. Can I just say in summary, I think you can understand from this committee's position that we are watching closely the changes that were announced very suddenly for us it was suddenly by the government on Monday. You're undergoing significant reform as an organisation to modernise the redress system. You've told us that the driver behind the reforms is, and I'm quoting you, encouraging confidence in financial services, but you've heard some of the concerns we've got. But as a result of those reforms, some claims you've told us will not be upheld that would have been before. You're telling us why. You gave us quite a clear, detailed explanation, Mr. Dipple-Johnson, so we're wanting to watch that closely. And we will be watching this reform very closely, and this transparency that you promised us is very welcome. And we will want to look particularly at the number of upheld cases and how many people are banned or barred from lodging a complaint. There are areas that we really want to watch closely. I think Graham Harriott made that point particularly as well. And a marker to a future committee is the 10-year limit if that comes in. So it would not be this committee that would be able to see whether that worked, but I'm laying down for Hansard, recording it, and I hope a future chair and committee read back that it is actually seriously a very big matter that we would have some concerns about, that the 10-year limit. We've seen challenges with the pension system. We've all, as constituency MPs and members of committees, seen cases that have come back many years later, motor finance being one particular one at the moment. So that's something that we have a concern about as well. But can I thank our witnesses very much indeed for their time. The transcript of this session will be available on the website uncorrected in the next couple of days. Thank you to our colleagues at Hansard. Thank you to our colleagues at Bowtie for the broadcasting, and thank you to our witnesses, James Dipple-Johnston, the Financial Ombudsman Interim, Liam Coleman, the Chair Interim of the Financial Ombudsman Service, and Jenny Simmons, the Interim Chief Executive Officer of the Financial Ombudsman Service. Thank you very much indeed. Order